Well, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, good night, you lovely folks joining me here nice and early at Marvel Snap Zone. Welcome back for another deck highlight style segment based around a soon to be with us brand new card in the form of Knull. Knull on screen for you now, arriving with us on December 13th, 2022, becoming the latest Series 5 card to be joining the game in Marvel Snap. Many players very excited about this one and the ability of what it could do, so today we're going to take you through 5 of our early picks for decks that we want to try out when we get our hands on Knull. So if you do enjoy this video, do me a favour, make sure you subscribe to the channel down below, just press the button for me, and turn on notifications to make sure you don't miss out anything we're doing here over at Marvel Snap Zone. If you're not familiar with Knull, let's take a look at the card first of all. 6 cost card, 0 base power, with an ongoing ability that simply says that it has the combined power of all the cards destroyed this game. That's a very strong effect and has a fair bit of potential. Knull consumes the power of all destroyed cards, but he costs 6 energy, therefore he's probably going to be one of your finishers. To play into that effect, the goal we're going to have with these decks we've built is to use your cards to destroy each other and push the amount of power he will be able to have. Cards that benefit from being destroyed and having powerful destroy effects are the name of the game here, such as Carnage, Venom. They synergize very well and get you an extra benefit and power onto cards like Knull. He'll also synergize very well with destroy effects across the entire board. That point may have been missed, in the mirror, for example, where both of your Knulls will always have the same power as it cares about both players' shenanigans. This also synergizes with cards such as Galactus destroying everything. The entire power of all the cards which were there before Galactus will now be the power of Knull. That's a very strong synergy we'll definitely look to highlight a bit later on. Counters are going to exist to this strategy, but the effectiveness of these could be quite inconsistent. Shang-Chi and Enchantress are the big hitters you're going to want to avoid. Both will nullify the effect of Knull. Few decks will build towards this with anything less than a 9 power Knull in general, and the effect is ongoing. So if built right, the destroy deck should be able to allow Knull to never be available to be hit by these cards by making sure that you do not have priority going into that final turn. Unfortunately, the effect requires other cards to be effective, and these cards are, not always available at the lower series of cards. Therefore, it's kind of hard to recommend picking up this card if you have lower collection levels or you're still down in Series 1 and Series 2. It's a pretty heavy build around, one with a really potential high power, but the amount of decks and styles it can go into is definitely going to be quite limited. Knull is not only a strong card, but it could add further flexibility to an already established archetype. This means his current power is very high. He's also a 0 power with 6 energy cost, which is a premium target stat line for Mr. Negative, which means there are some avenues we're going to explore there as well. However, to put the dampener on his potential, he does not create any new archetypes. He is enabled by the destroy effects and really has to be built around them. This requires a high density of destroy effects and cards worth destroying to build his power up. Regular Death Wave, for example, might not reach a high enough threshold for Knull to be truly useful. The limitations are real, and we may find the card is just too expensive and inflexible to truly be a powerhouse. He will always require specific cards and collections to be successful, which is going to limit what we think of him overall moving forward. Expecting this card to be an immediate powerhouse is very likely, however, and it should be a ton of fun. Going to start taking a look at these decks. Please do keep in mind these theory crafts have been built trying their best to limit the amount of Series 4 and 5 cards in most cases to try and make them as accessible as possible, but sadly, in some cases, that just isn't doable. So let's head on over to our first list, calling this one Greedy Knull, if you like. It's a 0-based deck for Knull this time around. As with most of the starter decks, let's just get greedy when we look at the first version we want to play with this, and then cut and adjust from there. Here we have an early game of destroy effects. The goal is very similar to other death decks. Destroy 2 cards so that we can wave on 4 and play death plus a thing on turn 6. The mid game is using big cards we can try to 0. Sarah's going to let us have backup final turns and another good early wave target. The trick with this deck might be playing wave earlier than usual to get a big card out so you can destroy it with a card nice and early to make Knull very large on the final turn of that game. Very simple stuff here, very traditional shell, and the greediest way we can look to play Knull in our opinion. Alright though, going on to our next deck, one that I find significantly more exciting myself, trying to toy around with Mr. Negative and Knull here as well. With the previous deck, we considered trying to get the balance in there to try and get Arnim Zola in the deck somewhere, but assuming at this stage that Knull would not count his own destroyed power, the payoff was quite minimal for that work. But how can we play Knull and Arnim Zola together? Mr. Negative is the key to doing that. We only need to hit one of them to make that happen, and we can double our Knull's strength quite easily. Additional benefits for a card like Mr. Negative in this deck for most of the destroy effects is that Negative will increase their power overall, as they're all quite weak statted cards to begin with, meaning that a card like Venom could just be fine as a 1-cost 3-power card that is going to get plenty big over the course of the game. This deck features Mr. Negative, Knull, Arnim Zola and Taskmaster, and assumes that you're always going to be playing Mr. Negative on turn 4 as much as possible, and when you do, you only need to really flip one of those 3 other cards, Knull, Arnim Zola, Taskmaster, and draw them to be able to do the end game this deck is looking for. The rest of this deck is very much a supporting destroy package focused on Deadpool and cards which are generally not negatively impacted by Mr. Negative. Bast can also turn all of these cards into better targets for Venom and also adds more power to your eventual Knull plays, so definitely one that's worth including here if you can. However, we can get significantly more fruity with the Mr. Negative decks and go full combo this time round, an even greedier line that might be able to work if we're lucky. White Tiger's going to cost 1 after Mr. Negative and produce a 5-power and a 7-power card you could eat both of with Venom. Copy the power of that with Knull, and then Arnim Zola those Knulls everywhere. Wong is there to try and enable this even further. Ironheart will push power around the board for the Venom combo as well. This is a very ambitious deck in our opinions, but demonstrates there is definitely potential in this idea to keep your eyes on. Jane Foster Mighty Thor might be a strong consideration for both of these negative decks, truth be told. She'll help you draw your combo pieces and potentially pull off some very disgusting turns. It's worth experimenting with these previous 2 builds and with Jane Foster in our opinion, but not 100% sold on her at time of recording. Up next, of course, is a more traditional Death Wave list. This is something that I imagine many players will be looking to start with when they approach Knull the first time round. The most likely home for the card is just a card in the Death plus Wave decks. The deck is very proven, and as we kind of work through destroy effects, Knull can be anywhere from like 6 to 10 power on average. You might say that's not much, but if we factor in the flexibility in your lines this gives you, the value kind of does increase overall. If you have to drop Deathlock on 3 and the opportunity comes up to Carnage later on 5 alongside Wave, you no longer simply lose Deathlock's power in that transaction. We can potentially try to include Venom as another destroy effect in this deck. So instead of just showing Deathwave with Knull, this build is looking to leverage Venom as well to add an efficient amount of extra power without going too over the top like the early greedier version we take a look at. Enter Lizard, maybe even something like Titania if you're trying to play with more Series 4 and 5 cards to be eaten by Venom and push efficient power. We can then wave and do Death and Knull at the same time to try and finish the game. The last deck of this video, however, is definitely for the whales among you. We're calling it Wallet Galaxus for a reason. It is easily the most expensive deck that is going to be on this list, but definitely the coolest because the combination between Galactus and Knull looks to be very, very sweet. Again, we could just look at replacing Knull into another Galactus build that already exists, and it will probably be fine, but that's no fun when we're looking at these theory crafting videos. So we're going to propose this build you see here, which may be more fun and very, very expensive. Destroy cards to build up your Knull, and if you could Sabertooth twice, that's going to be an extra plus 8 points of stats to Knull over the course of the game. We can use Electro to ramp to Destroyer or Galactus for a gigantic destroy effect, also feeding Knull, and while we do all this, we reduce the cost of death in the process. The cheaper destroy cards can even turn off Electro for later destroy shenanigans prior to big last turns with Knull and Death. These are very much where we're looking to start with Knull. It's definitely an interesting card that slots into a number of existing shells and maybe a few spin-offs of those shells as well. If you've got any ideas of your own and want to play Knull in a different deck that we haven't covered, let us know in the comment section down below. We'd be super interested to hear what it is you plan on doing with this card if you're picking it up from Series 5. If you want to come and chat with the community, we've got over 4,000 members in our community Discord server. Come and have a chat and let us know what you're thinking about Marvel Snap in general. The link to that in the comments section down below. One final time, if you haven't already, please do consider subscribing to the channel here over at Marvel Snap Zone. We're loving putting out this daily content for you right now, and we're looking forward to doing more of that and receiving more feedback going forward. Until next time, I have been HowlingMines, you have been amazing, and this has been a first look at decks with Knull.